Access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gigi Gakashino, a climate finance coordinator at AFD, Agence Française de Développement from the Research and Public Policy Department. I'm very excited to introduce this session today and have in the room some people there and online participation. I would like to thank Guilherme and João Paulo for organizing this. So a few words about today's session, which is dedicated to the hard-to-abate industries, like cement, aluminium, chemicals. So why does this matter? According to the IEA from the 2023 figures, emissions from industry account for about 1/4 of the energy-related emissions. This is also one of the most challenging sectors to decarbonize because those technology mainly involve chemical processes, high temperatures as well. And they are still, and they relate on some technologies which are under development or are still too expensive. They are also facing at the same time a couple of uncertainties, like which are driven, for example, by technological shift, trade policies, and competitiveness or market readiness, obviously. And this is especially, I think, material for industrial assets, projects which are very capital intensive and economically locked in over 30, 40 years sometimes. So here we have today, fortunately, a very diversified panel. So I thank you very much for being here. I think it will be a complementary one. Some people are in the financial side, technical side, because it's a technical one, and policy side as well. And we'll dig in a little bit on the Brazil. I think we have many people here from Brazil. We'll dig in the Brazil case, which is, I think every case is very context-based, which I guess faces many challenges and opportunities. So we will start right now. We will give the floor to Guilherme, who is in Paris, who is senior economist at Agence Française de Développement. He leads the development of the STEAM model, an FD macroeconomic tool to assess climate impacts and green transition risk in developing countries. Guilherme, I think it's 6 in Paris, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gigiga. Thank you very much for all that are here in this panel. Well, I will basically introduce how important are these sectors for the world economy. Decarbonize these sectors will be like a challenge that we need to face if you're thinking about like a proper decarbonation of the overall industrial structure. Just a second. Yeah, here is a quick graph, like just to show the importance of these industries. When you're just accounting for emissions, we're usually looking at the first scope 1 emissions, which basically emissions within industry, so it's like intra-industry emissions, but a lot of inputs that we're considering which is necessary to produce, necessary to even in the consumption, for example, of the vehicle or car, there are a lot of emissions that are embodied in the inputs that are being produced, and this is where most of the hard-to-abate sectors emissions are. If you here look at construction, for example, construction is the third more emission industry in the world after electric generation and agriculture, and most of the emissions of in constructions are this red to pink part here, which is a scope 3 emissions. So it's emissions embodied in the inputs, but not energy, all the other inputs. And what are these industries? Usually these industries are what we call the hard-to-abate industries. If you think, for example, we have like 5 industries here: aluminum, cement, iron and steel, fertilizers, and petrochemicals. These industries has a huge distribution, and here we have like developed countries in blue and developing and emerging countries in red. There's a huge distribution in terms of emission intensity. What does it mean? It means that for some countries, these industries are already very low emitting, but for many others, they are very high emitting. And developing countries are like mostly here in this red part of the graph, which means that they are emitting more than 1 kilogram of CO2 per dollar in most of developing countries. Of course, there are differences. In case of aluminum, for example, it's clear that the developed countries had already reduced a lot of the emissions. In developing countries, not yet. But cement is very emitting for both developing and developed countries. And why this difference is important? Basically, because it means that we have the technologies now, we have the technologies available for decarbonizing these industries, not all of them, but most of them. But diffusion is the key point when you're thinking about decarbonizing these industries. So why diffusion is important is you need to adopt the technologies that are available. And to adopt these technologies that are available, we need to, for sure, guarantee that there will be financing structure that will allow countries to access these technologies. So this is something that will be extremely relevant for the next 30 years, because basically having the technology sometimes is not enough. We need to find ways to access these technologies. The STEAM model is the model that we developed at TFT that tries to analyze the importance of these sectors for developing economies. Basically, these sectors, they are like not the industries that are depending on the sectors are not only the sector itself, but all the value chain and part of the upstream and downstream of the value chain are extremely dependent on these industries. And these green technologies need to it's extremely hard to move to these technologies because they present these countries, developing countries in general, presents a lot of structural rigidness. What are these structural rigidness? Basically, they cannot just move from one technology to another very easy because they depend already on these industries. They are there producing the country, generating a lot of benefits for the country in terms of first, avoiding fiscal constraints. We know that machineries inputs will be extremely important to countries in the next, for developing countries, if they want to put for the transition. And then they need to guarantee that they can import these machineries, import these inputs. And so these industries cannot just like reduce the production. We cannot expect, for example, that Mozambique will stop producing aluminum and move to other products. They need to produce aluminum, but they need to decarbonize aluminum, and they need to import a lot of machineries and inputs to decarbonize aluminum. These industries are also extremely important for raising fiscal revenue. There is like a huge dependence for many countries on these industries when you're thinking about paying, for example, for the ecological transition or for the green or low carbon transition. We need a lot of green investments. We need a lot of infrastructure. We need a lot of social expenses. We cannot just like count on the private sector. The public sector need to provide social expenses and need to expend a lot in social terms if they want to put forward the transition. So they need to keep receiving the revenues from these industries, directly and indirect. Not only, for example, I'm exporting iron and the revenues from exporting iron will come from my country. No, it's also all people that are working for iron industry, all people that are working directly or indirectly to produce the inputs necessary to produce iron, steel, cement. Cement is clearly an industry that is like extremely important in terms of employment and wages. And here we simulate what happens if you have a drop on these revenues from foreign currency, like basically exports, discounted by the imports necessary to produce this export. So it's basically exports here and fiscal revenue here. Well, some countries will be extremely impacted. For example, North Korea, in terms of foreign currency, extremely dependent. Here we have like the industries that they are extremely dependent. In the case of North Korea is iron and steel, but other, for example, aluminum is extremely important for Mozambique, Tajikistan, and Bahrain. Iron and steel is extremely important for many other countries, but like there are differences, of course. But we also account for the direct impacts, which is something that we need to account, because sometimes these industries are not extremely important for the economy. For example, if you're looking at here's the case of Brazil, it's extremely dependent on iron and steel. But if you look at the social economic dependence, and this graph shows in the vertical axis the importance of these industries for generating employment, in the horizontal axis in terms of generating wages, we are talking for some countries about like 30% of employment and 30% of wages are related to these industries, are related to these hard-to-abate sectors. So we cannot just like drop these industries and say, okay, we don't need anymore. They are extremely important in terms of wages, in terms of social aspect of the economies, and that's why we need to think about different strategies, different challenges that may emerge when you're thinking about decarbonizing these industries. If you think about we just keep doing as we are doing, of course, there will be low impact on net exports for these countries. If I produce aluminum the way I'm producing, there will be low impact. But more and more, it's becoming more difficult to export products with this volume of CO2 intensity. If you think, for example, the CBAM is a measure that is focused mostly on these industries, the carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe, and it's accounting for the emissions. And if you produce with the same amount of emission that you're producing now, basically you're losing markets. An alternative can be like the slow green transition, which is like, okay, I just replace the depreciated capital for green capital. It's a way to do this, of course, but for sure, this is not going to be like fast enough for the green transition. Why? Because most of these industries, as Giga said, they depend on long-lasting assets. If you're investing, like if I invest like 10, 12 years ago, probably these assets that I'm using to produce these inputs, they will last for like more 30, 40 years. So we need to put forward this fast green transition, but we need to account the social economics and the other impacts that may arise from this. Just to conclude, if you think about CBAM, of course, it's a very important measure, but the thing is like this, CBAM is a measure that is focused mostly on the idea that countries can substitute one product for another. They can substitute the products that one technology for another. They not account for the fact that sometimes, and most of the times, developing countries are stuck into technology. They need to find ways to finance this technology. And one way that we suggest to solve these issues is to use the revenue given by the CBAM to recycle it in terms of reinvesting in the countries that are needed to reduce the emissions. The same for IRA. In the case of IRA, of course, they are like extremely important because they will reduce the emissions in most of these industries. The US is making sure that they are importing only the iron and steel that are like low emitting, for example, hydrogen that is low emitting. But we need to find ways to finance countries in creating, in adopting and diffusing these technologies that are low emitting. Because as you said, like, as you saw, like, it's clear that there is like extremely difference between the technologies within these industries. So within industrial, the production of cement, there are huge difference between technologies. And the issue is like how to make developing countries to adopt these new technologies that are available, but so it's still extremely expensive for these industries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guilherme, for these insights. Now I will invite Luciana Costa from BNDES. Luciana Costa is the Director of Infrastructure, Energy Transition and Climate Change at BNDES. I think she will give you a sense of how this fits in the Brazilian context, obviously. Thank you, Guilherme.
Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here with us today. for this important discussion. I would like to greet also my colleagues from the panel. Thank you very much. Nicolas, Cristina, Ludmila, thank you very much for AFT and for everything. So before we start with the presentation, I would like to call the attention for one of the slides that Guilherme just mentioned. So we don't have, I agree with the, of course, the data is precise when he put all the emerging markets in the same basket. So there is a lot of more CO2 embedded in the products, but we cannot put all the countries in the same basket. In Brazil, we have our aluminum is less intense in CO2 than the rest of the world. Our cement is less intense in CO2. So that's even less intense than in the developed countries. So what I would suggest, Guilherme, is to break down, because my guess is that China is considered emerging market and might, and the distortion in that date might come from China. So let's put things clear here. In Brazil, our electric matrix is 85% renewable, is the most renewable among the G20. Our energy matrix is 47% renewable compared to 14% of OECD. So, and if you produce this in Brazil, it will have less carbon than anywhere in the world. So, or maybe it will be very low intensity in carbon in Uruguay, in Costa Rica, in New Zealand, places where the matrix is as or even a little bit more renewable than in Brazil. But among the biggest economy, Brazil is ahead of everyone. So that graphic, which put all the countries in the same basket, makes a distortion, and it's important to highlight that. So what we will have here, Brazil has opportunity. No country has a combination of comparative advantages that Brazil has. We have comparative advantages in energy, in power, in biomass, in biogas, in biofuels. I will go through that during my presentation. So that's why even our fleet is already, our cars in Brazil, they run in biofuels. So even in transportation, of course, transportation is a big problem for us, especially because of trucks and buses, because they run with diesel. But the light vehicles, they run using biofuels. And a car running with biofuels in Brazil issues less carbon than a full battery vehicle in Europe, because the power matrix in Europe is very dirty. So our problem in Brazil is with deforestation and land use. Brazil is the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter. That's because 50% comes from deforestation and 24% comes from land use. So our big challenge is here. In terms of even hard-to-abate sectors or power matrix, energy matrix, we are much ahead than any other G20 country, and I would like to emphasize that because that's very important. So we think that decarbonization is not just about energy, it's about, and I mean, it has to be socially just. And in order to be socially just, let's separate this global south from the north, and let's embrace the responsibilities of every country. So developed countries announced multi-billion plans for industry protection that will have, I fully agree with Guilherme, the IRA is pretty much a program to protect the American industry, not to partner with other countries towards decarbonization. And that's protection will impose a cost for the poor countries and for other countries. That's why Europe reacted with the European Green Deal. So in Brazil, what we have is our natural advantages that I will explain. So here is the emissions profile in Brazil per sector. So as you can see, energy is just 17%. It's very low. So, and when I say that we have a lot of comparative advantages, the first comparative advantage comes from its geopolitical advantage. Brazil doesn't have war with its neighbor for 150 years. Our last war was the Paraguay War. So it has been 150 years ago. And Brazil has relationship with all the United Nations. So just 15 countries in the world, they have relationships with all UN countries, and Brazil is one of these. We are a country, very big country, in terms of size and population. So we have more than 200 million people living there. So we have a dynamic internal market, and we have good advantage in exports. In terms of food security, Brazil is one of the major food producers in the world, and we are able to have food security for the Brazilian population, and we can contribute to the food security for the rest of the world. In terms of tropical forest, we have the largest tropical forest in the world and the largest potential for carbon sink. We have the first biodiversity in the world. We have 13% of the water of the world. We have, in terms of energy, like I said, one of the cheapest solar and wind energy in the world. So according to Bloomberg NEF, Brazil will produce the cheapest green hydrogen by 2030. And green hydrogen, of course, will not solve all the problems, but green hydrogen is key for the decarbonization of this hard-to-abate sector that we are just emphasizing in this panel. In terms of biofuels, biomass, biogas, Brazil has a huge potential of biogas and biomethane because of the vinhaça in the sugar and cane production, because of the cattle industry. We can produce a lot of biomethane, and that's big for the country. We have a huge potential of biomass. We have already a well-established ethanol industry in Brazil. We are producing ethanol of second generation, which is very, very productive. And this will be key for the decarbonization of the aviation industry. Without Brazil, I don't see how the aviation industry will decarbonize. Brazil will have to play a big role in the SAF production to contribute to the decarbonization of the whole world and the aviation industry. We have what's lacking in Brazil. Given our competitiveness in terms of energy, our matrix is not just that we have very cheap energy. We have an interconnected system. Electrolyzers, as everybody knows, cannot stop. It has to run 98% of the time. So price-wise, it makes sense because of productivity. And in Brazil, we can have green hydrogen production with dedicated solar and wind energy, but if there is an intermittence, it can be connected to the grid, and the grid is almost 90% renewable. And 60% of our energy matrix comes from hydroelectricity, and hydroelectricity acts as a battery to the system. So we have firm renewable energy. That's important. Which country in the world has firm renewable energy. Chile has very cheap renewable energy, but they are building the interconnected system. The US doesn't have an interconnected system like in Brazil. We have more than 180,000 kilometers of transmission lines, and we are increasing. We will have 270. So we are very well positioned. And of course, and we are developing green diesel. We are developing, we will produce green hydrogen, green ammonia, green fertilizer. The fertilizer industry issues the same amount of greenhouse gas emission that the aviation industry. So Brazil can play a big role in decarbonizing the fertilizer industry. Of course, we have potential for offshore wind because Brazil has a huge coast and has Petrobras with a lot of technology in offshore. But I will not mention that because we think that offshore wind is ahead in the time. Maybe in 10, 15 years we will be talking. So here is some the largest share of, Brazil ahead of everyone. Every country. So as you can see, we cannot say that our aluminum, our cement is more carbon intense than in the developed countries because it's not. And some numbers in terms of capacity factor and levelized cost of energy. So here is Brazil will have the cheapest green hydrogen in the world by 2030. And that's Bloomberg NAF data. It will be our green hydrogen will be cheaper than blue or than gray. So some numbers of ethanol. We are the second largest ethanol producer. We have a well-established ethanol industry. Our fleet is already running with biofuels, and that's a huge advantage because the developed countries, they are running to electrify the fleet, but the fleet will charge in a dirty grid. And here, our cars issues in the life cycle less greenhouse gas emission running in ethanol than a fully battery vehicle in Europe. We also produce biodiesel. Here is our potential in biomass with ethanol of second generation and also SAF. We have more than $10 billion in projects in Brazil right now. And we have critical minerals. I will leave this part to Ludmila because she's much better to talk. She will talk better about than myself on this. But we in Brazil at BNDES and this government, we believe that all the technological routes, they have their role to play in the energy transition. They are all necessary. We believe in electrification, we believe in green hydrogen, we believe in biomass, in biomethane, in biofuels. And for the electrification route, critical minerals are key. And here you can compare Brazil with the other countries. We have a portfolio. We have nickel. We have we have lithium. We have critical minerals for the energy transition. We are very well positioned, alongside, of course, with Australia and China. And then, among all those comparative advantages, we have BNDES. BNDES is the largest infrastructure bank in Latin America, one of the largest development banks in the world with 71 years. BNDES has been part of the all the industrialization phases of this country. We have deep knowledge of all the sector, mainly energy, mainly infrastructure. In Brazil, we have financed more than 90% of the installed capacity. BNDES has financed more 100% of the railroads, toll roads, more than 85%, all the subways. So talking about energy and infrastructure in Brazil and financing, without BNDES, it's difficult. And we, according to Bloomberg NEF, we are the largest financier of renewable energy in the world. So all the other banks, they finance in various countries. BNDES finance just in Brazil, and we are the largest in the whole world. We issued the sustainable bond. I'll leave that to Chris. She will talk better than me on that. And then, and here is my takeaways. We believe in all the technological routes. Green hydrogen is key for the hard-to-abate industry, but there is also biomass. We can produce SAF with biomass. We can produce green hydrogen with ethanol. So, and Brazil is playing a role on that. We have sophisticated technology on ethanol, and we think that this can be used for green hydrogen. We think that electrification is also a route. But in Brazil, we will focus more on buses and then light vehicles in the meantime. So that's my message for you. Let's not put all the emerging market countries in the same basket, because China may distort the. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luciana. And in fact, yes, Brazil is sitting on the left side of the distribution shown by Guilherme. We should have maybe invited Indonesia here or to balance the situations. Now I will invite Nicolas Pelletier-Tiberge, who is now the Global Director for Transport Sector in the Infrastructure Practice Group of the World Bank. Nicolas.
Thank you very much. And I'm very glad we're having that conversation today, and I'm going to focus specifically on the transport sector and present some of the initiatives we are doing in the area of transport decarbonization. I'll try to connect to the Brazilian agenda, because Brazil is a country where there are a lot of things happening today. It's one of our best partner, I would say, in this area of transport decarbonization. We've learned so much together, and I hope I will connect a little bit to what Luciana just presented in a very inspiring way. So just to go, I won't be too long on the why this is important, because we are here at the COP and we know that energy and transport are probably the two sectors that are the most critical on the mitigation side. We heard it, about a quarter of energy-related GHG emissions come from the transport sector. 3/4 of those from road transport. So that's within the transport sector, a subsector that is particularly important. What is important to note as well is that this is the fastest growing source of GHG emissions. And so we have a problem in transport. There are 1 billion cars in the world today, probably, and there could be 2 to 3 billion cars by 2050 if we continue the course. We've done some research at the World Bank that showed that motorization is deeply correlated to development. Each time per capita GDP doubles, motorization increases by 40%. And so that's one of the reasons that if we don't change our trajectory, what is going to happen is that we are going to have this continued increase under a business as usual scenario of transport-related GHG emissions. 8 billion ton per year today, that could grow up to 18 billion ton by 2050. So we have a problem, and this is why transport decarbonization is so critical. So at the World Bank, the way we frame our decarbonization strategies is using a framework that is well known in the transport community. It's called the Avoid, Shift and Improve framework. And we add a fourth pillar because we don't want to forget the adaptation story. It's also very important to make sure that transport infrastructure are climate resilient. So avoid means avoiding unnecessary trip, no? For example, by densifying cities, by bringing people closer to their jobs, so reducing the necessity to travel. Shift means shift to cleaner modes of transport, public transportation, rail transport, river-based transport. And improve means improve the carbon intensity of each mode, no? And that's where shifting to zero-emission mobility through e-mobility or hydrogen-based mobility becomes important. No? I want to highlight that there is a significant overlap with road safety as well. No? And road safety is another very important priority of the work that we do at the World Bank. There is a specific SDG on road safety where the world is also not on track. And there is an overlap because very often cleaner transport is also safer transport. No? And so we can have a double dividend by investing in cleaner mobility. So we have a portfolio of about $34 billion in transport sector globally. And the way we measure our contribution to climate objectives is by using a methodology that was developed for all the multilateral development banks called the measurement of climate co-benefits. And we have about 55% of our total financing today that goes into, brings climate co-benefits, about half on the mitigation side and half on the adaptation side. No? There are a couple of examples I will further describe. One is in the BRT of Dakar in Senegal. We have a number of urban transport operations and rail transport operations that are, these are two subsector of our transport work that are growing very fast at the moment. And then on the adaptation side, we are working with a number of countries, in particular small island countries in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, to make their transport infrastructure more climate resilient. I want to mention that in this area we are also working with Brazil to develop a road maintenance, I mean, called the CREMA contract, no? Which are the specific way of contracting road rehabilitation and maintenance contracts to transfer to the private sector the decision of deciding how much to invest up front and how much to maintain later on. Why this is important? It's because we've done some research that showed that as a result of climate change, the cost of road maintenance is going to increase very significantly in the coming decade. It's going almost to triple. No? So there is going to be a huge pressure on the financing of road maintenance scheme. No? And so, yeah, that's another area where Brazil is leading the charge by finding some innovative contracting arrangements. The Dakar BRT, a very nice story. One of the 30 urban transport projects that we currently have in our portfolio. It's an interesting story. It is going to enter in operation this month. So really, the COP is a timely moment. It will be the first BRT in Africa running with electric buses. No? And so there is an illustration there that countries like Senegal do not have to wait. They can leapfrog and move into electric mobility. Very significant GHG savings, also very important benefits in terms of improvement of transport conditions. And something else which is very important is air quality benefits. No? And Dakar has a particular problem in terms of air quality. And so it's not only a contribution of Senegal to the global objective of reducing GHG emissions, it's also very much a story to improve to bring local benefits to the Senegalese population. Another nice story, this time from Cairo, where we are also financing an electric mobility program. Cairo is a city with a lot of challenges in terms of congestion and urban mobility. So I won't elaborate too much on this one, but as I said, we have about 30 urban transport projects in our portfolio. These are two of them. Brazil is doing a lot in urban mobility. We have programs in Sao Paulo, Rio. We are doing something really interesting in Itajaí, showing that these BRT solutions are not only relevant for large cities, but they can also be replicated in mid-sized cities. So in addition to the financing part, one way we try to do is to work on the knowledge side as well, and to identify some areas where some research can help. Transport is an exciting sector because it's a sector where there are a lot of innovations happening at the moment. You know, all these discussions about hydrogen-based mobility, e-mobility, micro-mobility, autonomous vehicle. It's a really exciting sector to work at the moment. So that's one example of research that we recently published, and you can find it if you use the QR codes, looking at the experience of urban transport for development. And I would just highlight one conclusion from that, which was interesting, is that cities in the developing world have an opportunity to revisit land management. Not just because the land use management is a bit less cast in stone than in developing countries. And so it's really something that we need to think and not look at transport on one side and then urban development on the other side. We really need to integrate the two because they are very, very important positive synergies by doing so. Yeah, I won't elaborate too much on that. I mean, these are some of the conclusions from this work. A second study that we released actually in Sharm el-Sheikh at the last COP was about the economics of electric mobility. And there was this whole question about, well, is e-mobility something that the Global South should consider for the future, and focus on other priorities? The conclusions from this work is that there are some market segments, including electric buses, including 2- and 3-wheelers, that are really today make a lot of economic sense for developing countries. And we took a sample of countries, including fragile countries, very low-income countries, and the conclusion was overwhelming. When you monetize the air quality benefits, the GHG reduction benefits, there's no question that many countries today should look into the electrification of transport for these two, at least for these two market segments. We did some work on green logistics also. Freight is also a big contributor of GHG emissions. Maritime transport is a subsector that is particularly hard to abate, but we heard from Luciana that there are these opportunities with green hydrogen-based fuels, ammonia, methanol. Indeed, Brazil is very well positioned. Other countries are looking very closely at these opportunities. There are all these discussions about green corridors. So this is also an area we are looking at the World Bank, and also following very closely the ongoing discussions that are happening at the IMO now. Yeah, I won't elaborate too much on that. Finally, I want to mention that we created in Glasgow 2 years ago at COP26 a new financing facility called the Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, which now has received some resources from multiple donors. And this is an instrument that we are using really to generate a pipeline of transport decarbonization project now that is already operational and that is yielding really interesting results. I think we unlike other sectors, and I must say our energy colleagues are very lucky to have a lot of resources to prepare projects, to generate a pipeline. There is a lot of attention on energy. Transport is a little bit less visible, and this is why we're so happy this year that COP has prioritized transport and has moved it up in the agenda. And I think there is a growing recognition that this is an important sector, and so we hope that more resources in the future will come into the sector to accelerate the decarbonization process. So are just a few examples of activities that we have been able to finance through GFDT. And I mean, these are modest amounts, but you see, these are the kind of seed money that are very important to jumpstart some of these programs. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
For bringing up these knowledge actions from the World Bank and for not having forget the adaptation and resilience thing on the transportation sector. So I would love personally to look more on your productions at the World Bank, the report you produced on that. Yeah, thank you. Now I will leave the floor to Kome Ajekbo from AFC, which is the Africa Finance Corporation. Kome acts as a vice president in the investment division, sorry, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I work at the Africa Finance Corporation. I'm not sure how many people know much about the AFC, but I need to set the scene for you to appreciate the context of what we're looking at when we're talking about hard-to-abate sectors. How many people have been to Africa, by show of hands? Okay, great. Okay, so there's some context, but I think just like Luciana said in terms of setting Brazil aside for the emerging markets, I think it's very important to set the continent of Africa aside and appreciate the context of what is happening there. So the first thing I think most people know is that less than about 4% of global carbon emissions are coming from Africa. So you can see that we're not really contributing much. I mean, Nicola has the numbers. You talked about the maritime sector and its contribution of shipping to carbon emissions. On its own, if it was a country, it would be the third largest contributor to carbon emissions. That's shipping, substantially more than an entire continent, right? So again, what I want to do is set the context of what is happening on the continent, talk a little bit about what AFC was designed to do, and then it will sort of lead us into why we are doing what we do and the way we do it, right? And it really is the core and the heart of what we do. So a few statistical points. All of Africa is producing about the equivalent power that Germany produces. Germany. If you take out Egypt, the rest of the continent is producing about the same power Spain is producing. Our problems are very different, right? People talk about transition, to more sustainable or renewable energy. We need to have energy in the first place to transition to something, right? So that's first very important point. The next point is AFC. Why was it created and what do we do? AFC was created in 2007 to close the infrastructure gap on the continent. We started with about $2 billion paid in equity capital. Now, at the time, the World Bank published a report saying we need about $96 billion to be invested on an annual basis for the continent of Africa to close its infrastructure gap. That was in 2007. Fast forward to 2023, just, I think at the start of this month, the World Bank published another report. As a result of loss and damage and climate change, we need $400 billion on an annual basis to reach our target on the continent. Our problem has grown in the span of 20 years. That is the context of Africa. So when you think about hard-to-abate sectors, we have to think very differently. Because on the one hand, we have a development challenge. On the other hand, we have an economic challenge. Our inability to have power reduces economic growth by 2%. Our inability to have power reduces productivity by 40%. These are staggering numbers. So again, you need to keep this in mind when you're thinking about hard-to-abate sectors and you're thinking about development and economic growth and progress. AFC's mandate is to close the infrastructure gap, like I said, and we do this in 5 key sectors: transport and logistics, natural resources, oil and gas and mining. It's inevitable. No one can tell me in the decarbonization path you ignore those. Just like Brazil, we have abundant natural resources on the copper and the cobalt side, heavy industries, and more recently, telecom and tech, and power, generation, transmission, distribution. So we look at these core 5 sectors because we believe this is how you will unlock development and growth on the continent. So we look at it from a sector perspective, and then we also look at it from an instrument perspective. So think of it as verticals and, I don't know, vertically or horizontally, however you want to look at it. So those are the sectors we look at, and then we think innovatively from a product perspective. So we do project development, which is quite innovative at the time, which is early stage development, structuring, ensuring that projects are actually bankable. We have a team that specializes in that. We have some great successes. We have a wind farm, 60 megawatt wind farm that was just commissioned about a month or 2 ago in Djibouti. We did that from scratch on our own. We have a hydro project in Cote d'Ivoire we developed. So we have quite a lot of expertise. From an instrument perspective, we support financing all across the capital structure. So we do equity, structured equity, mezz, sub-debt, senior debt. And very recently, I think it was Luciana, you mentioned that, about the role of the public sector in financing. On the continent, governments are the largest financiers of public infrastructure. And so 4 years ago, we established a new team, Structured Product Solutions, to look at supporting sovereigns in the development of infrastructure. And I say all of this to say that we are looking at critical sectors for development, and we're looking at innovative instruments to be able to get us from point A to point B. Ahead of COP27, we published a white paper, A Pragmatic Approach to Net Zero. And that paper really articulates the way we're thinking about the problem. We say you need to, unlike Nicola's solution, I'm not picking on you, but given the context, and most people here haven't been in Africa, you can't sort of switch to trains. That's not really an option. You know what I mean? So we have thought about it differently. We have slightly different model that we use, or we're proposing. It has 3 prongs. The first is to localize, right? We have to start vertically integrating on the continent. We cannot mine our resources and then export them. We need to grow across the value chain and keep as much as we can on the continent, but do it in the most sustainable way possible. This will ensure development, economic growth, and actually reduce emissions just from transportation alone. The second is to, localize, rebuild. We have to rebuild. I think you both touched on this. Adaptation is critical, right? It's why 2 years ago we set up an asset manager whose maiden fund is called Infrastructure Climate Resilience. It's to ensure that all infrastructure being developed is being done in a responsible and sustainable way. So we have to rebuild our infrastructure. The impact of climate change, even though we are the least contributor, we are sort of the recipients, of the damage that others across the world have done. So we need to think creatively and responsibly about how we are developing new infrastructure. And the last piece of the puzzle is to finnovate. How do we financially innovate to ensure we're providing solutions on the continent? So I mentioned the ICRF. That is one way we're doing it. We're currently working with the Green Climate Fund to develop a program for sovereigns to ensure that we're able to support the priority project list for the NDCs to ensure they get across the line. So these are some of the ways that AFC is looking at sort of a pragmatic way to development on the continent in the context of hard-to-abate sectors. It's inevitable. But yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Kwame, and for bringing up also the importance of vertical and regional integration approach in Africa, and also the way the challenges there are different and the opportunities as well. And thinking about the opportunities, I think on the mining sector, I will turn to you, Ludmila. So Ludmila Nascimento, I guess I hope that I pronounce it in the right way, is the Energy and Decarbonization Director at Valley. So I think you have a lot to say on the technical side, and not only, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I know that you are expecting a lot of data, but I didn't bring any presentation, so as you did perfectly. Here, I think the world cannot reach the decarbonization targets without significant change in steelmaking. I think was Luciana mentioned, and also Nicolas, that steelmaking accounts for 8% of the total GHG emissions. So as mining, we are part of the problem, but also part of the solution. So more than 70 countries committed to net zero targets, and still, of course, represent this 8%, which is a lot. The amount of money which is required to decarbonize these industries is really, really important. It's over $1 trillion investments are required to decarbonize the steel industry. And this process will most likely to happen, of course, in steps. So just to give you an idea, currently, most of the steel making is applying iron ore and coal, which accounts for this amount of CO2 emissions. But there are some routes that use natural gas, and then in the future, the hydrogen. So I'll comment a little bit on that. So at Vale, as one of the largest iron ore producers, we are actively contributing to the efforts to decarbonize the steelmaking by seeking innovative downstream solutions. So our committing to fight carbon emissions and climate change, we have a pledge to reduce in scope 1 and 2, 33% by 2030, and net zero by 2050. For Brazil, 100% usage of renewable energy. Actually, the target was for 2025, but we accomplished that this year in 2023 with a project that we just commissioned. It's called the Sol do Cerrado in the north of Minas Gerais, a state in Brazil. So now in Brazil, all the energy that we use in our processes is renewable. By 2030, we expect that globally we can achieve that as well. So we have a very specific issue in the Middle East, but we are working to have the renewable energy there as well. Additionally, and perhaps this is the most challenging one, we have goals also for scope 3, which is in our clients, the steelmaking, to reduce 15% by 2035. So, and that's it's very important because this is the center of our strategy. And so Vale is working very closely to the clients and forging new partnerships to take the lead in evolution process towards ever more sustainable mining. Vale already signed 50 MOUs. I know that's a lot, and sometimes it's just paper, but in our case, we are working very hard with the clients to provide some solutions. Those solutions could account around 35% of the company scope 3 for the future. So what is our main solutions? We have developed one agglomerate product which called briquettes that use less energy. That's very important for the electric route, which now applies natural gas, but in the future can be replaced by green hydrogen. So the production of HBI with hot briquette iron, so as I mentioned, using natural gas is around 60% less than the pig iron production through the integrated blast furnace and BOF route, which is the most important today. In the future, this can be replaced natural gas by hydrogen using the green and renewable energy, and could go by zero emissions. So, And that's where Brazil is very important, as Luciana mentioned. Brazil has this renewable energy matrix and a very competitive energy. So we believe that Vale can also foster and be the anchor for this new industrialization in the country. And we see it as essential for steelmaking decarbonization. Brazil has this potential to be the leader of production of green hydrogen and vast potential with the extensive coastline that we have, access to the sea, and of course the location that we are, that can provide the solutions to Europe, to US and China, as we do currently. So from 2030 onwards, the cost of producing green hydrogen is expected to fall significantly with new projects and startups. And in addition, by 2026, if I'm not mistaken, we have the CBAM, right? Should be fully in place. So potentially Brazil exports to Europe will increase. And but of course we have challenges to achieve this potential. A low carbon product competitiveness, exporter Brazil needs to address some issues that can prevent the country to this new green hydrogen. So the first one is to ensure the firm and competitive renewable energy costs. Around $20 to $30 a megawatt, of course, without any sector charges and this is really important. Also, the electrolyzer capex, we need to bring that into, let's say, the Chinese levels cost, which is really, really important. And of course, the funding cost, which is very important because the capital cost in Brazil is really high at the moment, right? We are working with the government and the BNDES to lower down that. But it's also important in order to expand this industry as fast as we can, right? And particularly Vale, we are looking for this target in 2030. So we are pretty much 2024. We have 6 years left to have the licensing, the product and everything, the project to be up and running by 2030. So this is really important. The other part that I would like to discuss, as Luciana mentioned, the critical minerals. Of course, because Vale has 2 main platforms. The first one, it's not considered critical minerals, that iron ore, but I think it is critical as the steel industry needs that to decarbonize. So I just comment on that a little bit. And the other part is the critical minerals as we know, so copper, nickel, lithium, and other minerals. That is very important to the energy transitions, especially the EV industry, right, the batteries. So the demand for critical minerals surge, and there is an opportunity for mining to scale up responsibly while leveraging all the technology and accelerate the exploration and efficiency. I think Nicolas mentioned lots of examples on EV, right? And but for that, we'll need a lot of copper, nickel, and other minerals. So driven by rising demand and high prices, the market size for key energy transition minerals doubled over the past 5 years, reaching around $320 billion in 22 as data from IEA. As a result, energy transition minerals, which used a small segment of the market in the past, now moving to the center stage in the mining and metal industries. We expect that nickel demand grow by 2 million tons until 2030, mostly driven by EV demand. This is 50% increase from today's 4 million ton market. EV impact is justified by how much more intense EV is nickel than ICE vehicles. So it will depend on the battery, right? But the nickel, the ones that apply the nickel, they have a better performance. And also the life cycle can be increased. So EV has 40 to 60 kilograms of nickel versus 1.2 kilo for ICE. So EV adoption is outperforming the most optimistic forecast. And there is also this difference between the products, but I won't comment on that here. So One thing that everybody is saying that, oh, we won't have the amount of critical minerals to really decarbonize, but we have huge resources in Brazil, for instance, in copper, lithium as well. We have a base in Canada, North America, for nickel production, as well as in Indonesia, copper and nickel. So, and we have already some MOUs as well with some clients in the automobile industry to supply these critical minerals. So, just to finish here, I think I just want to reinforce what Luciana mentioned, that Brazil has a unique position to be this winner on the green energy and also green hydrogen potential. We need to go fast because with all the countries mobilizing as IRA and the European Green Deal, we need to move fast on the regulatory framework. I think Chris will comment a little bit on that. and then to strike all the projects that we need, right? And be able to achieve and reach the goals by 2030. Thank you.
Ludmila, and we leave to an overarching conclusion by you, Luciana. No, sorry, Christina. I'm just getting confused. So Christina acts as the Subsecretary for Sustainable Economic Development at the Ministry of Finance. So I think you will have a lot to say about policy and finance as well. Thank you.
That's a big responsibility. So good morning, everyone. Well, first I want to thank IDEFC for the invitation, and also AFD and the National Development Bank, and to congratulate all my colleagues here in this section, because all of the speeches were very fruitful and enlightful. So I have so many comments, and I had my own presentation, but not with slides as well. I just wanted to mention some actions that the Brazilian government is taking regarding sustainable finance to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors, but also the whole economy. So, in my previous life, my other life, I am a professor. I'm working at the Ministry of Finance since the beginning of this year. And I've been studying global value chains for almost 20 years now. And once you started to speak about the differences of the contexts between developing and developed countries, I felt like, no, we need to talk about the technology and financial differences. So when we look at the value chains, of course, the position of the countries the positions are very different. And poor countries and countries that, as we say, we call in Latin America development thoughts, thinking that these countries are in the periphery of the world system. So we have a gap, a technology and financial gap between global South and global North, or center and core and peripheral states. And this is not only due to national policies, but also due to the way that the international productive system is structured. And then when we think about this, we need to talk about transnational corporations. And so transnational corporations are operating worldwide, and they have a key role to decarbonize the world itself. Because when we look at the emissions, we look at the country level. And we need to talk about how much each transnational corporation itself contributes to the emissions. Why I'm talking like that? Because when we think about, for instance, regulation of carbon markets, it depends on how much carbon each source emits. So if we look at the Brazilian case, now we are trying to regulate the carbon market. We have proposed, because it still has to be voted at the Congress, a limit of 25,000 tons. So all the sources that are emitting more than that are going to be included in the regulation, in the regulated market. But then we are talking about a few companies, basically, especially now that the agro sector has put himself out of the regulation. So we are talking about the hard-to-abate enterprise and so from hard-to-abate sectors, companies. And most of them are international, transnational, multinational. And they are playing different markets. And in every market, probably they have a different strategy to decarbonize, because it also depends on the regulation and on the incentives for that. So what I'm trying to say here, we need corporate strategies and also state strategies to decarbonize. And the corporate strategies are being pushed up by the financial sector a lot. So then we need to look, as Komi was saying, to the different challenges we've got in every country, because there are countries that are not contributing to the climate problem, but they have huge social problems, and we still didn't fill this gap. So it's very important to decarbonize while we are also tackling the social challenges we've got in developing countries especially, but everywhere. And in the case of Brazil, we are trying very hard to talk about sustainable finance to tackle the climate change, because the word sustainability has in itself not only the environmental and the climate content, but also the social content, as in the Agenda 2030, right? And then I think Luciana is very right when she says, okay, but let's look at every country, because we've got different problems. But if we look at the way that the global value chains is structured, we'll see some common problems that need to be regulated internationally. And this is another difficulty, right? And so we are here in a global event, let's say, and we are trying to think about global and international frameworks to tackle to climate change. And this is not only about cooperation, but also it's about talking about the structural problems we've got at the financial system, financial international system. Next year, the G20 is going to be in Brazil, and we're going to be very provocative, because we need to change the international financial architecture to change what we need in terms of sustainable challenges, right? So this is the first thing I wanted to say. But then regarding regulation, we see many countries adopting common frameworks or common instruments, such as cap and trade systems, such as taxonomies, financial taxonomies, or also sustainable bonds, sustainable sovereign bonds, and so forth. And these instruments are key for decarbonizing, but in many countries, that's what I want to say. That's I thank you so much for the way you put it. They are just looking to a small part of the national problem, or also the continental problem, as in the African case, right? But okay, if we're looking to Brazil, as Luciana showed, like 25% of the emissions regards energy and industry and other sectors, but agriculture and deforestation, right? So we are going to try to regulate this market. Then we set this limit of 25,000 tons, and we propose a offset possibility that will probably foster the volunteer market and reforestation programs. So then we look at the other side of the problem. We are trying to look at the problem of the forests, biodiversity, and so forth. So we have to look at both at the same time. Not only the regulation of the carbon market, which is targeting the hard-to-abate sectors, but also the volunteer market, which has the possibility to foster projects that will provide resource to people that work with forests, let's say. But then when we look at those projects, it's hard to think about projects promoted by poor producers. Then that's the case. If we want to provide resources and to reduce inequalities, how can we scale up those projects and promote a cooperation between these producers? Look at the reason I'm doing. So they will be cooperating to conserve and protect a forest for, I don't know, environmental payment services. They will generate carbon credits which go to the volunteer market, which can be offset depending on the quality of these credits to the regulated market. But then we have the whole picture of a program. So the message I'm trying to provide here is that we have to connect all those instruments, and that's very hard because it depends on coordination. And coordination between many stakeholders, but in my view, in our view at the Ministry of Finance, committed to reduce inequalities. So we are trying to provide resources to the poor. Okay, so this is the ETS system. When we look at the taxonomy, sustainable taxonomy, Brazil is being very innovative because we've got not only environmental and climate objectives, but also social objectives. Mexico, for instance, has one gender, the goal is to reduce gender inequality. Our proposal is that the Brazilian taxonomy will got like reduction of gender and race inequality, regional inequalities between the regions of the country, but also between the urban and the rural areas, to promote and to guarantee rights and access to basic services to the population. And Brazil is also being innovative because our taxonomy includes the agribusiness sector, includes mining and quarrying, and includes services like tourism. So we will look at those activities in a different way. And of course, we are also trying to look for interoperability because we don't want to produce something that doesn't connect to the world. It's very special. I'm seeing when we look at the mining and quarrying industries, we need to look at them. Chile and Australia are also trying to produce taxonomies, including those sectors. But we have to look at these differences. We can try to check all the chain and all the scope 3 to 1 that those companies and sectors and activities are related to. So it's a huge challenge to produce a sustainable taxonomy that goes really into the detail, but it's also pragmatic. But that's, in my view, is a key instrument to channel investments towards sustainable production, right? So this is the second instrument I want to mention here, that it's being important to the Brazilian government now, but I think it's also important to other developing countries too. The third one, and then Luciana asked me to talk about this, is the sovereign bonds. So Brazil has just issued its first a sustainable sovereign bond. It was a success, and it also is committed to social and sustainable targets. And part of the resources will be directed to the Climate Fund, which is managed by the Environmental and Climate Change Ministry, but it's operated by the National Development Bank. And then these new resources are able to incentive to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors too. Right. O Fundo Clima. So, but then it is very creative, like to issue a new bond and to get those funds to an important fund that already exists, but it was, let's say, forgotten because in 13 years the fund only had 13 billion reais, and now with one emission it might have 10 billion, right? So it's a different perspective. It's really a way to boost the funding for those kind of investments. So these are the three initiatives I wanted to mention, but I still think that we need to find innovative instruments, financial instruments to develop technology, because we've got to reduce this technology gap between our countries, from the global south and the global north. We have to upgrade in value chains, as we were saying, can be verticalizing or not, but the idea is to upgrade in value chains, because we need to keep a sustained economic dynamic. And that's the thing. We cannot be dependent on international technologies to decarbonize, by the way, because this is another way of concentrating technology in rich countries and in powerful transnational corporations. And so we have to find a way to produce innovation and technology to the value chains, domestic value chains in developing countries. I think that's the major challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you for all the panelists, Ludmila, Kome, Nicola, Luciana, and Guilherme, who is still in line. And thank you, Christina, for bringing up this, highlighting the, I would say, the context-based Brazilian instruments, but at the same time, you need to fit them with what's going on international markets, how the corporates involved there, international companies are facing also other, other context from their investors, etc. So thank you very much for this discussion. So I'm closing it up, and I hope that we'll continue the discussion of the line. Thank you. Thank you.
Mitigation and adaptation. Developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment. Promoting a mentoring program between institutions. Delivering climate toolbox, including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment, and climate strategy. Offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation. Supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda. Mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals: knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business opportunities. In the past couple of years, the IDFC had been supporting members in mainstream common principles on mitigation and adaptation, developing a framework for the operationalization of the Paris Agreement alignment, promoting a mentoring program between institutions, delivering climate toolbox including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation, supporting events and partnerships to the international agenda, mobilizing resources and facilitating joint business opportunities and project proposal. IDFC Climate Facility. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC? The International Development Finance Club, created in 2011, is a network of 26 public development banks. Our mission? Speaking with a common voice, to leverage a greater impact in major international debates, and to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement, and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Our goals: knowledge sharing and capacity building among the IDFC institutions, enhanced collaboration between members and partners, and pursuing advocacy on the role of public development banks. How does it work? All year long, the club is working on contributing to the international agenda, coordinating working groups on SDGs, gender, climate, and biodiversity, releasing common strategic and operational publications, and reporting their annual commitment towards climate and biodiversity. IDFC. Let's work together to implement the Sustainable Development Goals towards 2030 and beyond. What is IDFC Climate Facility? Created in 2019, the facility has been supporting IDFC members in enabling knowledge exchange and offering capacity development on climate-related topics. Our 3 goals: to strengthen climate finance expertise and capacities, to originate and develop joint climate projects, to institutionalize and facilitate